They skipped my graduation, then asked me for $50,000. I'm Tiffany Gordon, 36. I stood on the stage, diploma trembling in my hands. The spotlight burned warm, but my chest felt cold. 4 years of late nights and caffeine, all for this one moment. I scanned the crowd. 3 empty seats stared back at me, the same seats my parents promised to fill. My throat tightened. Applause roared around me, but none of it was for me. I forced a smile for the camera, pretending I didn't notice. Then my phone buzzed inside my purse. A text. 30 calls. From my parents. From the ones who didn't show. We need to talk, it's urgent. My pride twisted into dread. Something was wrong, and I had no idea how wrong it would get. 5 minutes after I graduated, they made me choose. Them or my future. I grew up in a house where the spotlight favored one sister. Shannon laughed loud and filled every room with noise. My report cards gathered polite nods and quiet smiles. She's got the spark, my father would say, beaming. My mother called me reliable with a tired, loving voice. Those words felt small compared to Shannon's standing ovations. I learned early that quiet achievement left no echo, so I built my life around steady work and stubborn patience. I worked long days, then drove to night classes exhausted. 3 nights a week I sat under law school lights. Weekends belonged to textbooks and coffee-stained notes. Friends went on trips. I earned a trophy of solitude. Birthdays came with brief calls and a hurried, good job. Shannon's Instagram glowed brighter than any of my awards. She posted sparkly centerpieces and captions for hearts. My parents sent heart emojis. My finals got short replies. I saved every extra dollar I could scrape together. $60,000 became my stubborn private safety net. I pictured a small office, a sign with my name. That dream kept me awake through exams and night shifts. I imagined their faces in the auditorium, proud and present. I told myself this degree would finally rewrite our story. I booked the restaurant and bought the emerald dress. I sent my parents the date, the time, directions. They replied, "So proud of you," warm but distracted. Those words warmed nothing. They sounded like something to do. Then Shannon texted, breezy as ever, on a Tuesday. "Throwing a party May 15th, she wrote. "You should come later." I asked her to move it. She laughed it off. "It's just a ceremony," she said. "No big deal, Tiff." The words cut through 4 years of patient sacrifice. I folded my invitations and told myself they'd still come. Have you ever been told your triumphs are just formalities? It only exposed them. I woke before dawn, restless and oddly bright. The emerald dress felt like armor in my hands. I drove to campus with the windows down. The air smelled like summer and possibility. Graduation banners fluttered along the walkways. Families clustered, flowers and balloons everywhere. I smoothed my gown, practiced a steady smile. My heart thudded with the weight of everything. I scanned the crowd as names were called. I hunted for my parents' faces, for Deborah and Edward. Row after row I found strangers in joy. 3 empty seats sat like accusations under the lights. When my name echoed through the hall, I walked slow, heels finding the stage. The applause was polite and automatic, empty. No one from my life cheered louder. I mouthed my mother's name into the crowd. Silence answered me back where love should have been. It was colder than any critique I'd endured. I let the diploma rest heavy against my palm. After photos, I stood outside among laughing families. Someone offered congratulations. I smiled the practiced smile. My phone buzzed. I ignored it, then checked. A single Instagram post stopped my breath. Shannon's party photos tiled my screen like proof. There they were, my parents, smiling at her table. A caption read, "Celebrating my big win tonight." My chest dropped in a way words couldn't fix. If you've been through this, you're not alone. It's a strange thing to mourn in public. I felt both furious and completely hollow inside. My hands shook as I locked my phone. I drove without thinking, headlights carving the road. The city blurred. My mind rewound to every slight. Traffic felt irrelevant. Their faces filled my windows. I pulled into a gas station parking lot. 30 missed calls flashed like a warning light. My father's name blinked over and over again. I called back, breath shallow, voice tight. "Tiffany, it's Shannon. She fell. We need you." My stomach dropped into my shoes like lead. The hospital address felt impossibly near and far. I folded the gown in my back seat, hands numb. Hope and betrayal twisted into something I couldn't name. I made myself go inside, despite the noise. Their faces at the reception were worn and small. My mother looked at me like I'd failed her. My father's eyes were desperate and pleading. They told me the cost, numbers like blows. They used the word insurance like an excuse. My throat closed around the word I feared most. They asked me to pay for Shannon's surgery. The evidence waited in my inbox at home. I could feel the shape of betrayal sharpening. I drove to the hospital with my shoulders set. Something inside me hardened in the fluorescent light. Their smiles were on her feed when my name was called. I followed them into the fluorescent glare of the emergency room. The smell of antiseptic felt like a lie. Shannon lay on a stretcher, a shawl over her legs. Her face white, hair stuck to her forehead. My parents hovered, tiny and guilty like shadows. "Tiffany, thank God you're here," my mother said, voice slipping. My father's hands trembled when he reached for mine. "We don't have the money," he said, voice breaking. "She needs surgery. 50,000, maybe more." The number landed like a stone in my chest. 50,000 was almost everything I'd built for myself. 60,000 saved for a small office and a future. I felt the old pattern unfurl in the room. They'd always forgiven Shannon's mistakes with a shrug and a check. They had never treated my sacrifices like an emergency. My mother pressed a phone into my hand, pleading, "Please, Tiffany, you're our only hope." I wanted to answer with fury first. Instead, I opened my email, hands suddenly steady. A forwarded message blinked at me from weeks before. I recognized Shannon's name in the subject line. My stomach turned as I opened the thread. There it was, typed plainly and cruelly. "Skip Tiffany's graduation. She won't mind. This contract matters." My mother's face drained color, the words burning her lips. She said it was fine," my mother stammered. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The room felt small, the fluorescent lights too bright. My hands shook, not from grief but from clarity. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A cold, deliberate tilt to push my moment aside. I remembered every moment she'd laughed at my plans. The evidence sat like a blade in my palm. I thought of the dinners I paid for, of calls unanswered, of applause I'd never heard. I thought of the nights I chose books over life. My chest ached, not from pity but from resolve. "You did this," I said, voice low and even. "You chose her over me. You chose this." My mother sobbed. My father whispered apologies that sounded empty. They kept asking the same impossible thing. "Can you help?" The money was mine, yes, saved for a dream. But the betrayal cut deeper than the cost. I left the room with the email burning in my head. In that cold hallway, a decision began to harden. I could pay and close the chapter with no regrets. Or I could finally tally the cost of being invisible. Either choice would change the shape of my life. My thumb hovered over their number for a long minute. I thought of the ledger of favors and quiet debts. Everything I'd saved felt suddenly like a decision, not security. She didn't trip my day. She pushed it down the stairs. I walked back into the waiting room, steps measured and quiet. My mother's eyes found me first, wide with shame. My father's jaw trembled. He looked like a man emptied. They reached for me with hands that had always taken. "Tiffany," my mother started, voice thin and small. "You have to understand." I held up the phone. "Don't explain, show me the email," I said. They couldn't hide the thread anymore. Not with proof. My mother folded, the color draining from her face. I told them exactly what I had found. "Shannon told you to skip my graduation," I said flatly. "It wasn't an accident, it was planned," I added. Silence filled the corners of the fluorescent room. My father tried to say it was complicated. "It will ruin her career," he pleaded, voice shaking. "She needs this surgery," my mother begged, tears falling. I let the words pass, feeling each one land. Then I made my terms clear, steady and precise. "I'll pay for the surgery," I said, voice even. "But this is the last thing I'll ever do. No calls, no visits, no explanations, no more favors." They cried, begged, and promised change they couldn't prove. Promises had been currency in our house for years. I listened until their voices thinned into exhausted echoes. Then I stood, palms cool, and walked to billing. The hospital terminal glowed like a small altar of choice. I typed numbers with hands that didn't tremble. 50,000 left my account in a single click. The confirmation email pinged. The sound was oddly final. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled. Back in my car, I opened my phone again. I canceled the dinner reservation I'd made for 4. "Please hold," the voice on the line said. "No," I said, "cancel it, I won't be coming." Then I blocked 3 numbers with a clean, deliberate gesture. My mother's name disappeared from my screen like a fault line. My father's messages went to a folder I never opened. Shannon's profile I unfollowed and muted, removing her echo. The relief that followed was complex, not immediate or loud. It was a small, private clearing inside my chest. I had paid for her surgery, and then I closed the door. "If you've ever had to choose yourself, tell me below." The ledger of my life had finally been balanced. I checked my account balance, numbers small and honest. 10,000 stared back like a last breath. It felt terrifying and strangely clean. I thought of every unpaid hour I'd banked. This was the price of closing the ledger. I folded the confirmation into my wallet, like a receipt. Then I drove home under a sky that didn't judge. Silence settled, heavy and finally mine. I funded her surgery, and buried my need for their applause. I left Charlotte at dawn with a rented truck and quiet hands. The city shrank behind me, its expectations left on the map. Miami felt like a dare, hot, loud, and full of possibility. I signed a lease on a small office downtown with 10,000. No fancy sign, just my name on a battered brass plate. I bought a crooked desk, a secondhand chair, a cheap coffee maker. I answered my first client call in a room that smelled new. Single mothers, messy estates, custody fights, work that fit my heart. Each case I won felt like a stitch in a wound. Word spread slowly. Referrals arrived like cautious, hopeful visitors. My mornings began with court filings. My nights with grateful notes. I rebuilt a practice out of grit, not permission slips. I learned to bill my hours and keep my evenings sacred. My first 10 clients paid, then referred 10 more. Each testimonial on my website felt like someone saying I mattered. We celebrated our first paid month with cheap wine in the office. My mornings tasted like possibility, not permission. Sometimes I cried alone, then answered a client, steady-handed. My parents left voicemails I never listened to again. A cousin texted they were sorry, then stopped answering. Shannon lost a major client. The industry whispered about her party. I did not feel triumph or revenge, only a steady clearing. Freedom was quieter than I expected and sharper than relief. I paid her surgery to close the chapter without regret. Then I cut the cords that kept me small. I learned boundaries were not punishments, but promises to myself. Some scars remained, but they reminded me I had chosen me. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, tell me your story in the comments below. If you've been through this, you're not alone. The day they skipped me, I stopped skipping myself.
The auditorium was packed every row, filled with proud parents, teary grandparents, siblings holding signs. My name was called Last Dr. Linnea Voss, Highest Honors. Applause erupted, echoing through the high ceilings as I walked across the stage. I held my diploma tight, fingers trembling, not from nerves, but from the silence I knew was waiting for me off stage. I turned instinctively, scanning the seats where my family should have been. 2 rows near the front were empty, untouched programs still resting on the chairs. My classmates waved at cameras posed between bouquets. I stood on the side, adjusting my gown, smiling for strangers who offered polite congratulations. That morning, my parents had texted from Manhattan. "We're so proud of you," they wrote attached to a photo of Seth in a tailored suit cutting a cake that read, "Congratulations, VP Voss." My mother's message followed a minute later. "Try not to feel bad if Seth's news overshadows yours." Timing is everything. I didn't cry. I had stopped doing that years ago. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked past the press wall where graduates snapped photos with their families. A woman from the registrar's office stopped me, hugging me tightly. "We've never had someone finish with your defense score," she whispered. "Your advisor said you made the committee rethink everything." I thanked her. Then I walked alone to the car I had borrowed from a friend, sat behind the wheel, and let the applause I didn't hear fade behind me. There was no ride home, no dinner reservation, no gold-lettered card. But there was something else. There was a strange, steady certainty growing in my chest as I turned the keys and pulled away from the campus for the last time. I used to think love came in the form of attention. So when Seth won his first middle school debate tournament and my parents threw him a surprise dinner, I convinced myself they just hadn't noticed the art competition I'd quietly won the same week. He had a certificate and a photo with the mayor. I had a ribbon folded into the back of my notebook. It wasn't that they didn't love me, they just didn't understand me. Seth wanted what they wanted: status, performance, measurable success. He asked for golf lessons. I asked for more library hours. He spent weekends at tennis camps and mock trial tournaments chauffeured by our father's paralegal. I spent mine painting on plywood scraps in the garage, wiping my hands on old SAT prep books. By high school, the difference wasn't subtle anymore. Seth got internships at firms I'd only read about, networking they called it, though it was really just our father calling in favors. I worked after-school shifts at a bookstore, saving every dollar for college applications they said were a waste of time. When I was accepted into a summer ethics program in Vermont, my mother said, "Still chasing fantasy." My father added, "Dreams don't pay the mortgage, Linnea." They signed the permission form reluctantly, then forgot to ask how it went. Later, when I got the scholarship letter from Cambridge Full Ride, merit-based international cohort, my mother looked at it, skimmed the letterhead, and said, "So, more school." My father didn't say anything at all. He was too busy checking the LinkedIn update Seth had just posted, accepted into junior leadership rotation at Bryson and Tate. It had 300 likes by dinner. I packed my own suitcase, booked my own flight, said goodbye to no one in particular. At orientation in the UK, I remember watching other students call home laughing with parents on video chat sharing their schedules. I had sent a text when I landed. No one replied until the next afternoon. "Don't forget your coat," my mother wrote. "It rains a lot there." I saved the message not because it meant something, but because it was all there was. And I learned then love doesn't always arrive. Sometimes you just keep moving without it. The dining room hadn't changed. Same oak table, same silver candelabras that only came out for holidays. Same fireplace mantel crowded with Seth's framed milestones. His MBA acceptance, his wedding portrait, even a photo of him shaking hands with the mayor after some housing development ribbon cutting. I never saw a single picture of me in that room. They had invited me out of obligation. That much was clear when my mother seated me on the far end, 2 chairs down from the neighbor's daughter and across from a man I didn't recognize. Seth arrived late naturally and was greeted with applause like he'd just returned from war. He closed the Lakeside deal, my father beamed. Added $12 million in assets to the portfolio. I smiled. I was happy for him. I always had been. But when I tried to share that I'd recently returned from a policy summit in Nairobi, my mother blinked slowly and asked, "Is that near Morocco?" No one responded when I clarified. The conversation had already shifted to Seth's new condo in Arlington. Later, while I was helping clear the dishes, I overheard my father in the den, laughing with 2 of his colleagues. "She's still in that humanitarian stuff, whatever that means. At least Seth makes moves we can quantify." I didn't cry. I folded the napkins, put the leftover stuffing in containers. I loaded the dishwasher like I had after Seth's high school graduation party when our mother had told him, "You're the pride of this family." I'd been standing right beside her. When I finally left, I hugged no one. My ride to the airport was an Uber I called from the sidewalk. I looked back once, just to glance at the windows warm with lights and laughter. Then I turned away. By the time my flight landed in D.C., I had deleted every photo from the night. 2 days later, I submitted my final report on urban displacement patterns during transitional regimes. The lead strategist asked if I wanted to speak on it at a regional conference. I said yes, and I didn't tell anyone back home. Not because they wouldn't care, because I no longer needed them to. The invitation to join the advisory board came in the middle of a rainy Tuesday. I was eating cold leftovers in the break room when my supervisor forwarded the email, CCing me with a note. "They're watching you. Good work." It was a pilot coalition 10 nations, 5 NGOs, and a rotating advisory seat to monitor refugee resettlement programs. My task wasn't glamorous. It meant long nights reading inconsistent policy drafts, comparing legislative loopholes, tracking funding trails. But I loved every second of it. When my first report was cited in a UN session, I didn't even know. A colleague texted me a photo of the screen. My name looked foreign under the Geneva lights printed in Helvetica between 2 delegates arguing over implementation metrics. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I put my phone down and kept working. At home, the emails kept coming always, in group threads, always themed. Seth just bought a lake house. Seth's wife is expecting. Seth was nominated for the Regional Finance Board. I never replied. They never asked how I was doing, and that silence started to feel less like a wound and more like a wall I was learning to decorate. I rented a small apartment near DuPont Circle. The walls were thin and the heating hissed in winter, but it was mine. I stacked books on the windowsill, filled the fridge with exactly what I liked, set reminders to call the people who actually noticed when I was gone. When the keynote invitation arrived, Global Migration and Equity Forum in Geneva, I read it 3 times before it sank in. They wanted me to speak, not as someone's assistant, not as a stand-in, as myself. I booked the flight the same day, used my miles to upgrade to business class, and when I packed, I chose a black suit I'd bought with my first full paycheck. Understated clean lines, no label. The morning I left, my mother sent another update. Seth just got invited to a finance gala. Front page coverage. I stared at the subject line for a moment. Then, I archived the thread, zipped my suitcase, and stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The luncheon was held in a private gallery just off 14th Street, all minimalist furniture and catered plates arranged like exhibits. I wasn't supposed to attend. My colleague had dropped out last minute, and they asked if I could step in. I nearly declined. Geneva had only been 2 weeks ago, and I was still recovering from the high of it. But something told me to go. Miles Granger introduced himself with a firm handshake and a glass of water instead of wine. "You're Voss," he said, scanning my name badge. "You gave the closing keynote in Geneva. The bit about equity not being charity that stuck with me." I thanked him, unsure what else to say. He was older than I expected, sharp-eyed, thoughtful in a way that felt earned. He asked smart questions about policy fatigue, funding gaps, community-led reform. I answered carefully, aware I was being studied. Halfway through the meal, he leaned in and asked almost offhand, "Do you happen to know a man named Seth Voss?" My fork paused. I smiled. "That's my brother." Miles blinked, then chuckled. "Small world. He interviewed at our fund last fall. Bright guy, great credentials. But a little eager. Talks more than he listens." I took a sip of water to steady myself. That sounds about right. He didn't press further, and I didn't offer more. We shifted back to climate financing, but something had shifted in the air around me. Something quiet, but seismic. Not just that he knew Seth, but that he had met us both and remembered me. Afterward, as we walked out beneath a gray sky, Miles handed me his card. "I'll be in touch," he said. "There's a seat opening up on one of our strategy boards. Would love to hear your thoughts." I tucked the card into my coat pocket and thanked him again. That night, I sat at my kitchen table turning the card over in my hand while my phone buzzed beside me. Another family thread Seth featured in Business Today. I didn't open it. I just looked at the name printed in silver ink across the card, Miles Granger, Senior Partner. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the last hiring list I'd reviewed. The folder landed on my desk late on a Thursday, marked urgent in red ink across the tab. It was the quarterly hiring slate for strategy consultants, one of the last steps before onboarding approvals. I flipped through names, making mental notes until I saw his. Voss Seth. He had applied for a senior advisory role on the international strategy team. The same department I had helped design the metrics for. The same space I'd spent 3 years building from scratch. I didn't react, not out loud. I just set the folder aside and stared out the window for a long minute. His resume was exactly what I expected, polished, confident, packed with keywords. He'd clearly done his research, but under global impact experience, the examples were superficial. Regional sales expansion, internal training modules, nothing substantive. Later that evening, a message popped up from my mother. The subject line was simple, "Help your brother." The body of the email was worse. "He really needs this, sweetie. You know how important this is to your father. Can't you just help for once? You've always been the sensitive one." I closed the tab. No reply, no hesitation. The next morning I reviewed the folder again. Most names were approved with minor comments, but when I got to Seth's, I drew a single line through the margin and typed the rejection note for HR to finalize. Before I sent it, I paused, then added one sentence at the bottom, an addition I knew they'd let stand. Sometimes degrees do matter. I hit send and returned to my notes for the migration policy review. No one responded. Not my mother, not Seth, not the HR team. They processed the rejection like any other. It was done. The silence that followed wasn't hollow this time. It was clean. It filled the room like fresh air. For once, I wasn't shrinking beneath their expectations or trying to dodge their disappointment. I was simply standing exactly where I belonged. 2 weeks later, a new investment file appeared in my inbox. A small acquisition. Nothing flashy. But when I scanned the list of shareholder names, one of them made me sit back in my chair. The company was a shell dressed up with recycled branding and half-finished language about urban revitalization. The acquisition team flagged it for its real estate potential, nothing more. I wouldn't have given it a second glance until I saw the list of personal investors attached to the firm's failed bridge round. There it was, near the top, Gerald Voss. And just below that, Seth Voss listed as strategic lead and advisor. I stared at the document, rereading the line item that showed how much my father had invested. It was nearly everything: his pension withdrawal, a second mortgage, even a liquidation of bonds I remembered him bragging about at my cousin's wedding. There was a note in the margin: acquisition to proceed. No objections filed. They didn't know. They couldn't have. Not yet. I signed the internal authorization with steady hands. No announcement. No message. No nameplate change. Just a formal ownership transfer and a standard legal notice scheduled to go out with the rest. 30 days. That's what the letter said. 30 days until existing operations ceased, all assets reassessed, all leases reviewed. It was standard language. Impersonal. Final. The property tied to the firm's last investment portfolio was a residential unit on Leland Avenue, an old 4-bedroom brownstone they had used as collateral for a community redevelopment loan that never materialized. It had been quietly deeded to my father as temporary holding listed under his name. He had once told me years ago that the house would be Seth's stepping stone, a starter property to flip, build, expand. Something real. I had driven past it once. I remembered the bay window, the ivy curling up the side, the porch light that never quite worked. I'd watched my father standing on the stoop that summer, arms crossed, nodding proudly as Seth paced beside him on a call. Now the deed was mine. I added one line to the notice before signing off. All keys and tenant files must be returned to the new owner's representative by Friday close of business. Then I clicked send, and I waited for them to read the fine print. The invitation hadn't even been addressed to me directly. I'd been copied CC'd on a mass message from my mother with a digital card attached. Join us to celebrate Aiden's 3rd birthday, backyard lunch, catered brunch, family photos at 2. Beneath the pastel balloons and polite script was a note. We'd love to see you, Linnea, but don't feel obligated. It's mostly family. Mostly family. As if I hadn't been born from her body. As if I hadn't once vacuumed confetti off that same patio after Seth's college graduation while she poured champagne for his friends and called him the pride of our bloodline. I didn't reply, but I didn't ignore it either. That morning, as guests began to arrive with gifts and sunglasses, a black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out in a tailored suit, handed the envelope to my father, and left without a word. They opened it on the porch, surrounded by streamers and catered trays. Inside was a single-page mortgage transfer, formal and stamped. Effective immediately, the property at 92 Leland Avenue had been transferred to the ownership of Dr. Linnea Voss. Stapled beneath it was an eviction notice. At the bottom in my handwriting, a short RSVP. Regretfully, I cannot attend the party. I will, however, be arriving next Friday to inspect the property. Please ensure the keys are on the counter. I never heard the silence that followed, but I felt it. My phone rang 7 times that night, 6 voicemails from my mother, a string of texts from my father. Even Seth called his name, lighting up on my screen like a ghost I'd already buried. I let it ring, not out of cruelty, but because this wasn't about cruelty anymore. This was about peace, the kind they never gave me, the kind that doesn't require permission or performance, the kind that simply arrives and stays, quiet, deliberate, immovable. The following week, I arrived at the house with a lockbox and a clipboard. A property manager met me at the gate. The porch light was off. No one had left a note, but the keys were there just as I'd asked. The house was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just outgrown the version of myself that once felt so small inside it. I walked through each room slowly. The living room still smelled faintly of pine cleaner. The same beige sectional sat under the bay window. The dining chairs had new cushions, but the frame was still chipped from when Seth kicked one over during a birthday tantrum. No one had ever fixed it. They just rearranged things to hide the flaw. The walls were covered in frames. Seth at prom, Seth at college, Seth with his newborn son. I searched the hallway, then the study. Not a single photo of me, but I didn't feel erased anymore. I stopped in the den where the fireplace stood as the centerpiece. The same mantel where my mother once promised to hang real accomplishments. She had meant awards with job titles, not research fellowships, not thesis medals. From my bag, I pulled the frame I'd had made months ago. A copy of my doctorate diploma embossed and sealed. Below it, a brass plaque read, "Most likely to fail." I hung it above the mantel without ceremony. There was no applause, no phone held up to take a picture. Just me standing in the house they said I'd never deserve. I took one last walk through the kitchen, checked the back door, then returned to the front. The keys were still on the counter where they had left them. I slid them into my coat pocket, walked outside, and turned the lock behind me, not out of spite, but because the girl who once begged for a seat at the table now owned the table, the chairs, and the roof above it. I moved back to Boston in early spring. The air was still sharp, but the light was changing. I found an apartment on a quiet street near the river, nothing extravagant but full of windows. I furnished it slowly. No rush, no one to impress. The emails started coming again, this time softer. "We're proud of you. Saw your article in the Times, great work. Come by sometime if you're in town." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain. They weren't angry anymore, just polite. Like I had become a distant professional contact they couldn't afford to lose. I spent my mornings writing, my afternoons consulting, and my evenings preparing a new keynote for the International Forum on Civic Inheritance. Title ownership and legacy rewriting the inheritance. I wrote it not for them, but for the ones like me, the ones who built homes from cold silence, who grew roots in places no one watered, who turned absence into momentum. I thought of the girl I used to be hunched over scholarship essays while Seth's parties roared downstairs. I thought of the night I stood alone at graduation and the morning I hung my degree in a house I didn't even want anymore. They said I was too soft for the real world, but the world turned in my hands because I never hardened. I didn't carve my name into anything. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood still until they had no choice but to recognize what wouldn't bend. My mother dropped her wine glass the moment she saw me. The stem slipped through her fingers like she'd been shocked by something electric, but it was just me, standing there. On the deck of the house she thought she had rented for her 40th wedding anniversary. The glass didn't shatter. It hit the wood and rolled, catching sunlight before settling in place like it didn't want to make a scene. My father went pale. He half stood, one hand gripping the arm of his chair, as if unsure whether to rise or run. My siblings froze. My sister Brooke clutched her husband's arm. My brother Andrew's mouth opened just slightly like a man who'd seen a ghost but didn't want to admit it. They hadn't invited me. They hadn't spoken to me in 10 years. But here I was. And here they were. I took a slow breath, adjusted the collar of my black dress, and stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask them why. I didn't explain how. I simply said, "I hope you're enjoying your stay." And then before they could speak, I added, "This is my house." The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was something older, heavier, like a door they'd nailed shut years ago had just creaked open behind them. "My name is Claire Benton. I'm 30 years old. And 10 years ago, my parents told me very calmly, very clearly, that I was no longer part of their plan. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked away. But I never disappeared. Not really. And today, neither did they. Growing up in the Harwood household meant knowing exactly how to exist, just enough to be useful, but never so much that you became inconvenient. My older brother Andrew was the golden child. Ivy League graduate junior partner at a top firm by 28, already showing signs of a heart condition by 30. My younger sister Brooke danced through life like a debutante from a Southern postcard. Married into money before finishing college, she had the smile, the figure, and the right last name twice over. And then there was me, Claire, the middle child, the placeholder between two completed legacies. I was quiet, observant, not rebellious, just misplaced. I never slammed doors or dyed my hair. I never smoked or cursed or stayed out late. I just watched. From the age of 7, I carried around a camera, a plastic disposable one at first, something my grandmother gave me one Christmas when she couldn't remember what I liked. I took pictures of everything, sunlight hitting the dining table, dust floating in the hallways, the way Marta the housekeeper smiled when she watered the orchids and thought no one was watching. My mother would glance at the photos, straighten a cushion I'd leaned on, and say with a polite smile, "Photography is a lovely hobby, Claire. But it's not a career. Not for someone like you. Someone like me." I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but I learned to take my pictures in secret. In the garden, from the stairs, in the mirror when no one was home. I learned early that love in our family came through achievement, not attention. And my photos, my quiet little glimpses of the world, earned nothing but indifference. So I studied economics. I got good grades. I kept the camera hidden in my bag like a vice. I gave them the version of me they thought they wanted. But even then, I knew it wouldn't last, because sooner or later I'd have to choose between being seen and staying silent. And I already knew what silence felt like. We were celebrating in a quiet, expensive way, like always. White tablecloths, soft lighting crystal glasses that caught the glow just right. A restaurant where the servers never interrupted and the food arrived like a performance. I had just graduated from NYU's business program. My father had helped secure me an internship at a top-tier advertising agency. My mother wore her signature pearls. Andrew toasted to my future. Brooke took a picture of the dessert tray, and I sat there holding a secret so heavy it made my hands ache. When the waiter cleared the appetizers, I folded my napkin and said it plainly. I'm not going into advertising. I've declined the internship. I've been accepted into a professional photography mentorship. I start next month. No raised voices, no slammed hands. That wasn't the Harwood way. My mother kept smiling, but her eyes turned cold like frost forming on a window pane. My father looked at me like I'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. It was my mother who broke the silence first. Claire, she said calmly, you're tired. The last few years have been intense. You'll think differently once you rest. I won't, I said. This is ridiculous, my father muttered. You're not throwing everything away. We've invested in your education. Your future is at Patterson and Pierce, not in some hobbyist's garage. I already declined their offer. You what? And then came the dismantling, slow-measured and deliberate. Photography was unstable, below our station, a waste of potential. They spoke in the tone they used with business associates who had disappointed them, firm, polite, final. If you do this, my father said at last, you do it alone. No help, no fallback. We will not indulge this phase. You'll come to your senses, my mother added, adjusting her water glass. Eventually. I waited to feel scared. I didn't. I felt something else hollowed out. 2 days later, I packed what I could into the back seat of a used Honda Civic. Some clothes, 3 cameras, $800 left from graduation gifts. Andrew watched from the doorframe, arms folded. They'll get over it, he said. But he didn't sound convinced. Brooke didn't come down to say goodbye. I drove away quietly, no arguments, no drama, no last-minute pleas. I crossed the city line and turned off the family phone plan that night. What I didn't know was that I had also been written out of dinners, out of photos, out of stories told at holidays, out of memory. And for the first time in my life, I understood exactly what it meant to be invisible. The first year was brutal. I rented a room in a 5th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn shared with 3 other girls who barely spoke to me. During the day, I worked as a barista. At night, I waited tables. And between those shifts, I shot whatever I could, cityscapes at dawn, free headshots for musicians, dating profile photos for people I met in line at the laundromat. I ate dollar-slice pizza and skipped meals more than I admitted. I counted change before swiping my Metro card. And every few weeks, I stared at my phone thumb, hovering over the contact labeled home. That first Christmas, I called. The line rang. No answer. No voicemail. Just an empty loop of silence. I tried again on New Year's, then my birthday, then Easter. By summer, I stopped trying. Andrew texted me a few times in the beginning. Happy birthday. Hope you're okay. One time we met for coffee. He was tense, checking his watch every few minutes like he might get caught. They just need time, he said, but he didn't meet my eyes. You know how they are. About the image. By the 2nd year, even those texts stopped. I learned through Instagram that Brooke had her first child. I learned through an obituary that my grandmother had passed away. Her name was printed in serif font beneath a floral border. Mine wasn't printed at all, not as a granddaughter, not as anyone. I looked at the names of the surviving family, all there Charles, Margaret, Andrew, Brooke, and then a white space where I should have been. That kind of absence isn't quiet. It rings in your ears. It burns behind your ribs. It's one thing to leave a family, it's another to realize they've already erased you, and still I kept shooting. Not for money. Not yet. Just to prove, if only to myself, that I still existed. Light, shape, silence. I chased them down alleyways and subway tunnels like they were lifelines, because at that point they were. The break came on a Tuesday I almost said no to. I was 2 shifts deep into a 12-hour day when someone canceled a catering gig. A friend called desperate. There's this wedding photographer, she said. Big deal. High-pressure client. His assistant got food poisoning. He just needs someone to carry equipment and not get in the way. I showed up early, didn't speak unless spoken to. Held reflectors, carried tripods, wiped sweat off lenses before he had to ask. At 2 a.m., while we packed up his gear in the back of a van behind a fancy hotel, he looked at me for the first time like I might be more than background noise. You've done this before. Not officially, I said. But I want to learn. His name was Garrett, mid-40s, sharp exacting, the kind of man who noticed if your shoelaces were tied unevenly. He wasn't kind, but he was fair. Within weeks, I was assisting him at high-end weddings. Not for charity. Garrett didn't believe in charity. He believed in usefulness, and I made myself useful. He taught me how to work in chaos, how to light a subject with nothing but a flashlight and instinct, how to send invoices, how to write contracts, how to shoot like art but deliver like business. One night, while reviewing my shots from a townhouse in the West Village, he handed me a glass of wine and said, "You ever thought about real estate?" "Not really. You should. Real money's there. People get married once. They buy houses every damn year." I laughed. Then I tried it, and he was right. A modest listing led to a referral. The referral led to a brownstone, and the brownstone led to her, Diana Ellison, widow, publisher, collector of books, architecture, and opinions. She watched me work for 15 minutes in silence, then said, "You see angles people miss." That's rare. She hired me for another shoot, then another. Then she invited me to photograph her personal homes for fun, she said. There were 5: a brownstone, a ski lodge, a pied-à-terre in San Francisco. But her favorite, the one she always saved for last, was a beach house in the Hamptons. "It's too quiet for my kids," she told me. "Too far from the city. Too much ocean. They hate it." But I didn't. I loved every corner. The light. The sound the stairs made. The way the wind moved the curtains even when the windows were shut. 6 months later, Diana was gone, and I got a call from her attorney. "She left you something. I expected a camera, or maybe a note. But what I received was a deed and a letter. This house deserves someone who sees it. Make it your own. But more than that, make it work for you." And I did. I moved into the beach house the same week the ocean turned gold before 7. The light hit differently out there, low, warm, generous. I converted the guest house into a studio, hired 2 assistants, ordered furniture with clean lines and soft wood, started offering private shoots for clients vacationing in the Hamptons. The company name came to me one evening as I watched the sun melt behind the waterline. Golden Hour Visuals. It sounded warm, intentional, like something you'd want to remember. Within a year, we were shooting luxury properties across the Northeast. By 2, I had 6 employees. Architectural Digest ran a feature on my work. Hamptons Magazine called me the eye behind the elegance. I bought a small apartment in Manhattan. Quiet, simple. No family photos on the walls. I had what I once believed impossible stability, freedom, beauty on my own terms. People respected me, trusted me, paid me well to capture their stories in angles of light and silence. But at night, when the house quieted and the sea forgot me, I would sometimes open a drawer in my office, the only one I never let staff touch. Inside were photos I didn't display. Old ones. From before. Andrew's law school graduation. Brooke's Sweet 16. My parents' 25th anniversary, everyone in summer white standing by the garden wall. My mother's hand perfectly placed on my father's arm. My smile a little tight. I'd look at those photos the way someone might study a painting in a museum from a distance, with disbelief, with restraint, not out of longing, but not out of indifference either. There were things success had healed, the hunger, the fear, even the shame, but not the loss. That part stayed. Not raw, not loud, just present. I didn't miss their approval. But I hadn't stopped wondering what it would have felt like to have it, just once. And then, one afternoon, an Instagram notification pinged on my phone. A photo posted by Andrew Harwood, my parents, standing on a beach, smiling, arms around each other, and behind them, unmistakable in its shape, its light, its sky, was my house. I stared at the photo on my screen. The caption read, "Looking forward to our Harwood family reunion this July. Nothing fancy, just time with the people who matter most." The light behind them was unmistakable. The soft bend of the dunes, the curve of the deck railing, the driftwood sculpture I'd hung by the outdoor shower. This wasn't any beach. It was my beach. My house. I scrolled through Andrew's post again, slower this time. A comment from Brooke. "So excited Daddy booked the perfect spot." My stomach turned, not from anger, from the kind of irony that feels like a private joke, except the joke is on you. I pulled up the reservation dashboard through the property agency I worked with when I traveled. Client Harwood H. Dates July 14, 21. Status paid in full. They'd rented my house through an anonymous luxury listing. They had no idea. I stared at the confirmation screen a long time. There was an option to cancel. Angela, my property manager, had flagged it for approval. "Unusual situation," she wrote in the note field. "Do you want me to pull the booking?" I almost clicked yes. Almost turned the page before they could rewrite the chapter. But then I remembered something my mother once said, folding linens with military precision. Control the setting, control the outcome. And this was my setting, my house, my light, my name on the deed. So I didn't cancel. I just scheduled the cleaning crew for one day earlier. I left fresh linens, stocked the kitchen with what I knew they liked, and waited. For the first time in years, I would not be the ghost in the room. I would be the one holding the frame. But would they recognize the picture? The first thing I heard was laughter. Soft, polished, familiar. The kind of laughter I hadn't heard in years but had once memorized like a song on repeat. It floated through the open doors of my house across the kitchen. I renovated the deck, I rebuilt, and into the garden where they were gathered. A long white table, wine glasses, linen napkins, my mother in blue, my father at the head, Andrew and Brooke on either side. For a moment, I watched them from the hallway. Not hidden, just not yet seen. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I stepped through the French doors, steady, silent. No dramatic entrance, no camera crew, just me and the floorboards I'd chosen under the feet of people who once erased me. Brooke saw me first. Her hand froze midair, still holding a forkful of salad. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Andrew followed her gaze. His expression didn't change at first. Then he blinked once slowly. My mother turned last. And when her eyes found me, I saw something flicker behind them. Not recognition, not warmth, not even guilt. Just surprise, as if I were a door she'd closed years ago and never expected to creak open again. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I looked directly at her, then at my father, and said, "I hope you're enjoying the view." A few glances. A confused laugh from someone I didn't recognize. Then I added clearly, calmly, "This is my house." The silence wasn't dramatic. It was thick, heavy like wet wool. The kind of silence you don't fill with questions because the answer is standing right in front of you. My father stood halfway. "Claire, what I own this house," I said. "Diana left it to me. I run my business here. You rented it through a broker. You didn't know. I let the truth settle like dust in sunlight. Not rushed, not angry, just true." Then I looked at my mother. She hadn't moved. "No one turned you away," she finally whispered. "No," I replied. "You didn't turn me away. You just stopped looking." After the table cleared and the sky dipped into amber, they lingered in pockets too polite to leave, too rattled to speak freely. Andrew found me first. On the porch. "You could have canceled the booking." "I could have," I said. "Why didn't you?" "Because you wouldn't have known what you walked away from." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once held mine at the bus stop in 3rd grade when I forgot my lunch. "They erased you," he said, "but not for me." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know how to stay without losing my place." We didn't hug, but he didn't walk away. Later, Brooke brushed by me in the hallway, still clutching her phone like a shield. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "I think it makes me honest. You're not the only one who got left out." Her voice cracked barely. "They just used me differently." I watched her go. She didn't look back, but she didn't slam the door. And then there was my mother. She stood in the doorway of the guest room, still wearing that pale blue blouse, the one she used to save for good weekends. "You turned out different than I expected." "That's because you stopped expecting anything from me." For the first time, her face softened. Not apology, not regret, just less armor. "I suppose we thought you'd come back on our terms." "And I did," I said, meeting her eyes. "Except now the terms are mine." The next morning, I woke before the house did. The light was soft again, low and golden, touching the edge of the windows like it always had. I made coffee, fed the gulls, folded the towels someone had left crumpled in the laundry room. At 8:12 a.m., there was a knock on the studio door. My father, alone, shirt tucked too neatly, voice already cleared. "We didn't know how to come back from it," he said. "You didn't try." He nodded, and for once said nothing else. There was no speech, no apology shaped like a legal statement. Just that silence, the kind men like him rarely allow to exist. "Will you come to dinner tonight?" he asked. "No. Can we see you again?" I looked at him, not with cruelty, not with longing. Just clarity. "Maybe," I said, "but not here. Not as your daughter. Just as me." He swallowed, once, and left. Later that afternoon, as they packed their things, I left a note on the kitchen counter. Typed, brief. "I hope you enjoyed the house. Thank you for respecting the space. C." I didn't sign it, Claire, not your daughter. Just C. Clean, precise. Enough. No hugs, no healing arcs. They came as strangers. They left the same way. But this time, I wasn't the one disappearing. That evening, I set one more table just like they had. Same deck, same ocean, same chairs but rearranged. No linen napkins, no wine glasses. Just paper plates, grilled vegetables, and laughter that didn't need permission. 2 of my assistants came by. Garrett dropped off a lens he knew I liked. One of the neighbors brought pie. No one asked who I used to be. They only knew who I'd become. As the sky went dark, I looked across the table. Not a family bound by blood, but one chosen in quiet, in work, in respect. Someone asked if I wanted a photo. I almost said no. Then I nodded. They raised their glasses, the light caught their faces just right. And for once, I didn't hide behind the lens. I stood in the frame, not forgotten, not forgiven, just seen. And that was enough.